Hello and welcome everyone to RMIT Online's first Masterclass for 2025. My name is Oscar Santos. I have the fabulous job of looking after all of our wonderful industry partners over at RMIT Online. If you're joining us for the very first time and it's your first Masterclass, welcome. For people who have joined these sessions before, welcome back. This is really the opportunity for us, for us all to hear directly from some of our industry partners as they share live examples, insights, projects, concepts, topics from a range of different areas. And today's Masterclass is a perfect example of that. But before we jump straight in, it's important that I'll start with an acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to acknowledge the people of the Wurrung and Burrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation on those unceded lands that we conduct the business of the university today. I respectfully acknowledge their ancestors and elders past and present, and I recognise the traditional owners of the different lands that we work and meet today. I'm super excited because today's webinar, titled Designing for Good, the Power of Agile UX, is going to be a fabulous one. We will hear how innovative design can transform business challenges and turn into an award-winning solution. Sharing their knowledge, I'm joined by Lee Barnett from Symplicit and Kim Upini from World Vision Australia. Lee is the head of product design at Symplicit. He's an award-winning designer with over 20 years experience, specialising in data-driven, user-centred design, digital experiences for some of Australia's largest organisations. Lee also happens to be a co-designer of RMIT Online's user experience and user interface courses. Kim is the head of digital at World Vision Australia, also an award-winning digital strategist, and who leads the digital media performance, UX design and experience, as well as overseeing all digital products at World Vision. So thank you both for joining us today. And just before we jump straight in and I hand over to Lee and Kim, I want to encourage everyone on this call to use the chat function. If you've got questions, please put them through. We will absolutely endeavour to reach those towards the end of the conversation. And we absolutely want this to be interactive. So you've absolutely heard enough from me. I will pass over to Lee and Kim to take it from here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Oscar, for the introduction. And thanks, too, for putting on the event. I know a lot goes on behind the scenes to make these things happen. Big welcome to everybody. And also thank you to everybody for attending today. Really, really excited to be co-presenting with Kim, one of our clients from World Vision. As Oscar said, my name's Lee Barnett. I'm the head of product design at Symplicit. We are a HCL Tech-owned company, so that makes us part of one of the world's largest technology and software providers. However, we do come from very humble beginnings. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Symplicit, we were founded in 2003 by a psychologist and an industrial designer. And they had a pretty simple idea. They believed that human insight can drive better design outcomes. So although we have changed a lot as an organisation since then, that idea is still very central to our practice. Also, before I start, I'd just like to do a quick shout out and give some credit to the team that worked on this engagement, at least the small team from Symplicit. There was a much larger team at World Vision that also worked on this, probably too many people to introduce today. But a call out and a shout out to Ruben, Nico and Ben. I don't know if you're on the call today. Hello, if you are. They are the people that made this possible from Symplicit side. So there's three key things that we're hoping that you can take from today's call. The first is the way that we think about product design and development at Symplicit and the two-sided equation that we use to kind of articulate that both to ourselves and to our clients. Also want to try and underpin the importance of speed to insight. And speed to insight is important because it helps us minimize the cost of change. So they're kind of three big ideas that we want and hope that you will take from what we share today. We'll also try and get through our content fairly quickly and give everybody an opportunity, as Oscar said, to ask questions and take advantage of the fact that Kim and I are here with you today. Lastly, something that we're very proud of is the result of the application of this process. So in real world terms, World Vision have seen a 5 times increase in their conversion rate, a 30% increase in overall digital acquisitions. And it was also recognised by the Good Design jury in the Web Design and Development category in the 2024 Good Design Awards. So lots of great results. The other result that's not articulated on the page, and I think Kim will talk about a little bit more, is the real world impact of more children sponsored. The way that we're going to break the talk down for you today, so there's kind of 3 topics that we want to get through. Kim will introduce the brief and the problem. She's also going to talk a little bit about World Vision and who they are as an organisation and what they do. I'll then talk about the approach and how we looked to solve this problem through concept design. And I'll hand back to Kim, who will then talk about how they took the insight we gave them and implemented the change and measured the impact. Over to you, Kim.
Thank you. Before I talk to you about what we wanted, I thought it might be useful to give you a little bit of a taste of who we are. World Vision Australia is one of Australia's largest charities. Next year marks our 60th year in operation. We're part of a global partnership that operates in over 100 countries across the world, with 35,000 staff who work to improve the lives of 200 million others. In 1 year alone, this might look like 31 million people we reached via humanitarian assistance, 11.5 million people that we reached with food assistance, and 3+ million people who gained access to clean water for the first time. We work across a number of different areas, but our primary focus is child health and welfare, and our primary means of doing this is via our child sponsorship program. Child sponsorship, for those of you who aren't aware, provides a child, their family, their community with access to education, nutrition, medical care, and clean water. Over 15 million children benefited from child sponsorship programs in 2023. And as a slight tangent, because it's a question I'm often asked working in the not-for-profit space, does the money actually get to the people that need it? The short answer here is yes. From every dollar we raise, 84 cents goes directly to the field. The remaining 16 cents is split across administration, staffing, and fundraising. And now to the challenge. In 2023, my role was newly created. There was no digital team to speak of. Digital performance was at an all-time low. The reality we were faced with was that we hadn't invested in digital for a long, long time. And as an organization, we knew that there was a massive amount of opportunity if we got the digital experience right. We could see that supporters that joined via our digital channels stayed with us the longest and had the highest, greatest lifetime value. We could also see some of our key issues. Our website was really noisy and filled with competing asks. There was no emotion and no connection to the children that were at the center of our work. The impact of donations wasn't clear. We were missing key proof points. And possibly most obvious of all, when people were ready to give, the donation and sponsorship options were long and hard to complete. We knew all of this, or at least we had evidence to suggest that these were pretty big problems for us. What we didn't have was the capability or the capacity to rapidly solve these issues internally. So we approached Symplicit, and the request was threefold: re-establish a focus on child sponsorship, make the impact of their donation clear to our supporters, and achieve an exceptional digital experience that would help us ensure ongoing future growth in the years ahead. And Lee's going to tell you how that happened.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, great introduction, and what an awesome organisation to work with in World Vision. That global reach, it's always fantastic to hear about those stories. So what I'm going to share now is just an overview of how we kind of approached and solved the brief that Kim just talked about. The first thing I want to give you is just a framework that we use to help kind of, I suppose, break down what could be a very complex task into a simple mental model. And for us, the product development equation is something that we break into two parts. So the first part of that is make sure that you're building the right thing. And then the second part is, okay, now you can build the thing right. It is really simple, but we like this because it helps us kind of look at a problem like what Kim talked about and then articulate back that, okay, we're in zone 1 right now, and all of our focus is going to be on giving you the evidence and the confidence to know that you're building the right thing. The way we did that is through an approach called Agile UX. There's kind of 2 key goals that we look to achieve through this approach. The first is obviously making sure that we're building something users want or need. And then the second is minimizing the risk of building the wrong thing. And that's really important. There's been various modeling done over the years looking at the cost of product development, especially as it moves through the product development lifecycle. And what we've typically seen from that modeling is that the cost increases exponentially as you move through each phase of product development. And in some cases, it can be as much as 100 times more expensive to have built the wrong thing and only recognize that in production. And you've got to think about what sits behind this. So it's not only the cost of all the stages of developing and building the product, it's also all the training that goes into telling a sales force about it, the marketing that needs to support it, the processes and operations that underpin it. So whilst there might be a simple digital interaction that a user is engaging with, there are lots of hidden costs that go into product development. We say build the right thing because when we're gathering requirements and designing and analyzing the effectiveness of those designs, we're sitting at a cost of 1 or 2x. And that's where we want to learn about all the things that are perhaps wrong with or can be improved with the design. The other framework that we use in our practice is design thinking, obviously. Interestingly, something that we've done away with recently is the double diamond. We think it's really good to use the components of design thinking as building blocks, but it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So for us, context is really important. The context in this scenario was product optimization, but sometimes we're also doing new product development, or sometimes we might be asked to just evaluate a product. And depending on each of those 3 contexts, we deploy these building blocks in slightly different ways. What we've also retained from the double diamond approach is the idea of divergence and convergence. So opening up our thinking and then closing back down to try and move towards driving outcomes and delivering outcomes. So the context, as I said here, was product optimization. What that means for us is that we typically start with a define phase. That's because there is a product already in the world, and we can evaluate that product through a whole range of different methodologies, which I'll talk about shortly. Once we understand how that product is interacting with the world today, we start to make assumptions and introduce design interventions to try and improve on it. We then want to validate that our design interventions are working the way we thought they would and achieving the outcomes that we intended them to. And once we've done that, we have the confidence to engage with development teams and start to hand over with them. Now, the other thing with Agile UX is the way it differs. We use the same methodologies of user experience design. However, integration with development is a really key part of Agile UX. So making sure that you're asking at the early stages of this process from developers what's possible is one of the key things that differentiates Agile UX from just standard UX. So I'm going to walk through now a snapshot of 3 of the phases. Starting with define, the key question that we want to answer here is, how is the thing performing today? There's a range of different methodologies that we use, but keeping in mind our goal here is trying to really increase the speed of our learning loops and get to findings and insights as quickly as possible. Typically, we find one of the best ways to start this process is talking to the people that work in our clients. So they're looking at this product, they're talking with, interfacing with users every day. They know it really well. And so typically that's where we like to start to just get our feet on the ground and get a sense of what's happening. They can also be a really good source of information in terms of what research exists that talks about this problem already. That means that we're not doubling up on any research effort. We also like to deploy heuristics. So we use Nelson Norman's 10 heuristics of UI design to do really quick evaluation of a site. Typically, the way we like to do this is have a paired design team and they do it independently and then come back together and discuss their findings and look for any kind of anomalies or outliers and spend their time addressing them. But heuristics is really effective. Obviously, user testing. We love to see how a product's performing today in the hands of the users. And then finally, data and analytics. So the fact that this was an existing product, it meant there was a lot of existing data in terms of how people were interacting with it. And so that's another source of information for us to build an understanding of how the product's performing today. So just a really quick snapshot, the benefit of this. So this was a 10-day phase. Through the SME interviews and meta-analysis, already we're starting to get a really good picture of what's working well, what could be improved. We're also gathering ideas and we're getting insights about the product in its current state. From a heuristic standpoint, I really like heuristics to help us identify the low-hanging fruit. As you can see here, there was 13 critical kind of errors that we identified in the current design. And that could relate to something like accessibility standards not being met, or it could be a really critical issue of usability, which is hindering people or likely to hinder people getting through a flow. And likewise, we put this in front of users, so we're also able to gather that first-hand knowledge and understand perhaps, what's the data and analytics telling us? Why might that be the case? Why might that be happening? So also, again, really helpful to get that early. Now, I won't summarize all 400 odd key findings, but just to give you a flavor of the types of things that we're looking for, I'll share some of the key findings. So something that we found really interesting in the data and analytics was that actually the most visited page on the site was the About Us page. And we found that really interesting because we then thought, well, what is the content on the About Us page and why might people be going there? What are they looking to kind of find that they're not getting elsewhere? We also learned, and this is fairly typical, that lots of people don't go below the fold. So if you've got something to communicate, you better do it like really quickly and efficiently because you're going to lose a lot of people not scrolling down the page. On one of the most important pages of the site, the Sponsor a Child page, we actually saw that this had the highest drop-off of any page on the site in the current version. So that was a real red flag for us and for Kim and the team as well. It's one of the reasons that they kind of came to us in the first place was to address this big issue. What we also found through the qualitative testing was that there was two very distinct models for how people were thinking about selecting a child to sponsor. And this was a very personal interaction. In essence, some people wanted to go through a process of selecting a child, and they might be looking for things like a shared birthday with their own child or an affinity to a certain place. But there was other people that actually just wanted to sponsor a child and didn't want to go through a selection process. So it was really important that we unearthed that early. And then lastly, one of the things we also observed in the qualitative testing was people getting overwhelmed by the volume of content. We know the way that people typically interface with websites is they look to scan content and find information that they find most relevant. So seeing people kind of hit a blocker with these larger text blocks just kind of supported and validated that for us. So 10 days in, we've learned a lot about how the thing's performing today. For us now, we need to move into how are we going to improve this for tomorrow into the design phase. This was a 15-day phase for us. And the activities we conducted here were a landscape review. So looking out and identifying, what are the patterns that others are using, in either this or adjacent industries. We facilitated co-design with a large group of World Vision employees from all across the business. So not just from the product, digital and marketing teams, but also from the international development teams. We then went into developing wireframes. Because we were departing from the existing style, we also went through a process of trying to establish that new visual identity, and mood boards was a way that we were able to do that really fast. And then lastly, we went into designing and prototyping. So again, like just thinking about speed to insight, just through the landscape review and the co-design, really quickly we were able to identify a heap of ideas and a whole heap of patterns that we might be able to borrow and use in our own designs. Again, there's a lot of changes we made, so I'll give you a summary of some of the top line ones that we think were going to have the most impact. Firstly, it was trying to reduce that decision fatigue that we heard about. And so a big part of this was just a single-minded focus on the thing that was most important. And that for World Vision was sponsoring a child. So really reducing the number of call to actions when you land on the homepage. We also looked to spread the content people were going to the About Us section for through the child sponsorship acquisition journey to avoid them having to leave that flow and go somewhere else on the site. So just providing some of that key content in the flow was really important. And we also in the redesign catered to different mental models. So that idea of either choosing a child or World Vision choosing a child for you. We tried to cater to them at the entry point for the child selection process. And then lastly, we simplified the content groupings and reduced a lot of those large content blocks down to something that was much more visual, much easier to scan and get a handle on. We also introduced simple things like tabs to just break up some of the content and give the user a sense of control and try and reduce that overwhelm that we saw them experience in the user testing. So we've now understood how the product's working. We've made some assumptions about interventions that we think are going to improve it. The next thing for us in this concepting phase is then validating. Did our interventions work? And that's what we do through the discovery phase. So the activities we undertook here were a comparative test. We use a methodology here called attractive. It's a standardized survey. It kind of looks at the pragmatic and hedonic traits of a product. We used a short version of this, so it's a 10-question questionnaire as opposed to 28 questions, which is the full version. We had a time constraint, so we used the short version. We conducted another round of user testing. We synthesized those insights and got to a point where we thought, okay, we've got enough confidence now to say to Kim, we think this is ready to build. Just some of the key highlights from what we learned through that research. So first of all, the new design performed much better on ease of use, which we expected to see. As Kim said, there wasn't a lot of investment in digital, so the benchmark wasn't, or the baseline wasn't that high, but really great to kind of validate that the new site was more usable. We saw that people had a preference for the aesthetic of the new site over the old. And then the last two I'm going to share here are probably the most important. The first one being comprehension. Really important to converting people to sponsor a child is that they understand the product and how it works and what they're going to get as a sponsor. So to see this type of increase in comprehension was really good for us. And really good for Kim to get the confidence and go back into her business and say, you know, look at how this compares to the old site. And then lastly was engagement. And the way we asked this was about, was through a question targeting, how do you feel about the emotional connection you're making with the child you're about to sponsor? And as you can see here, it's the biggest increase that we got. Kim talked about it earlier. It's so important to converting people to sponsor a child is that sense of emotional connection. We're also able to kind of group this insight with some of the qualitative insight that came out of user testing. And again, the goal for us here in this concept design phase is giving Kim, our client, the confidence and the evidence to go back to the business and say, look, we've proven this is going to outperform the old site. Give us the investment and the funding we need now to do it. So there we go. So we're days in, let's say weeks. I'm going to hand over to Kim, who will now talk a little bit about the implement measure phase.
Thanks, Lee. Look, I would love to say that it was sort of instant from here on in. And for most organizations, I think it would be safe to say that the path from validated concept designs to implementation would be relatively straightforward, but that wasn't the case for us. We didn't have a digital team to speak of, and we certainly didn't have the funds. So I spent about the next 3 months sort of showcasing this work internally and alongside a sizable business case to get approvals and funding to hire a talented team of people to progress this work further. And with that small team on board, we commenced the detailed design process. And as part of this, we really evaluated the concept designs that Lee and the team delivered together with our development team, with a view to determine, had we designed every scenario and every edge case? Had we considered all the breakpoints for all screen sizes and devices? Have we reevaluated system and technical constraints to make sure there wasn't anything missed in the first sort of round of this? Have we thought about where and how we might want to leverage additional analytics or insights and provision for the setup of this? And perhaps most critically, we worked together to make decisions about the best way to break up the work, so design and development work could progress iteratively from here on in. And while not wanting to stray significantly from the concepts that Lee and the team delivered, there were some changes we made as part of the detailed design and implementation phases. And here are just some of those key ones, really. So the first one was the homepage, and it was really important that we maintain the focus on child sponsorship. We knew that we needed to persist with this on the homepage. We've talked about it a few times now, but our previous experience was really noisy. There was an overwhelming number of asks. We didn't want to repeat this. What we did do was reevaluate some of the content on this page and look at what was essential and what might be better housed under a dedicated page that explained child sponsorship in more detail. The result was that the impact and intent of the homepage was unchanged, but it wasn't quite as long as the original concepts. The simplicity and design concepts for the child profile page were amazing, but unfortunately the images we received from the field didn't align with the sizes we featured in our designs, and so we set about maximizing the size of the child image. We also introduced an image of the community program manager. We felt that this was a really important way to create a greater connection and insight into the community that the child was a part of. And at this stage in the journey, we also explored ways to making sponsoring multiple children easier. A key learning after our initial release was that we'd kind of missed actually a pathway for a key audience. The questionnaire that we'd designed and built was really beneficial for those in the early consideration stages and helped sort of provide a more guided experience to reduce some of that overwhelm. But it didn't meet the needs of those that were in a higher sort of consideration phase or had greater intent and were more ready, I guess, to actually complete sponsorship. And so we created an alternate pathway that had a really rapid view of results. You could see all of the children that were available for sponsorship as opposed to just the one at a time. And we use this consolidated view when we run campaigns for specific communities like those doing regreening and climate work, or for promotions like 1,000 Girls, where we focus in on women and girls explicitly and the impacts to that group across the globe. And the last one that I wanted to touch on is probably one of the most significant changes this process introduced, and one that Lee hasn't already spoken about. And that was the reduction in steps needed to complete a transaction process. Oh, sorry, a sponsorship transaction. Our previous experience required upwards of 6 steps in this journey, 3 alone needed for personal and payment information. and we lost about 50% of potential sponsors with each step. This new experience consolidates it into one single step, and the impact of this was massive. And I think that kind of gets us to the results, which I think is, you know, this is where, if you like, it's the proof is, you know, is absolutely evident. The results to date have been phenomenal, to say the least. Last financial year, we saw a 30% increase for digital. This year, we're on track and targeting an additional 30% growth on top of that. So that's 30% more children being sponsored each year across our digital channels. And that's, you know, from an instance where we weren't seeing any growth, that's humongous for us. We've also seen really strong conversion rate improvements across the website, going from an average of 1%, sometimes lower, to well over 5%. So we are above industry standard now in terms of what that conversion rate is now looking at. And all of this is a really strong indicator that the new experience, it's working, and it's working really well. And so what's next is probably the key one. Well, we're still in the process of rolling out the new experience across all of our digital assets. We have a small team internally, and it's taking longer than it might ordinarily, but we're updating all of our products and services and improving all of our content across the site. We're also, and perhaps most importantly, running an optimization program where we look at new ways to further enhance the experience. And I think this is probably the greatest thing about great digital experiences and great UX. It's not ever done. There's no finish line. It's never complete. It's something that we'll continue to work at, to adjust. And that means, you know, this year alone, there will be some big sizable updates, but more critically, there'll be constant iterative improvements from here on in. And I think that's the key.
Thanks, Kim. So I suppose just rounding out where we started, hopefully the three kind of key things that we would like you to take from this are: make sure that you're building the right thing before you build the thing right. You saw the size of investment and the difference. For us, it was circa 30 days of effort. For Kim, it was up to 6 months. So yeah, really, really important. What can you do to increase the speed to insight? For most of us working in the industry, it's going to be in some sort of commercial setting. Even working with World Vision, there is commercial realities. I'd say maybe even more than other organisations. They're very frugal with their funds. So the quicker you can get to learnings, the better off that your other stakeholders are going to be and perceive you. And then also keep that idea of minimising the cost of change top of mind. So if you ever need to defend design, I think this is a really good tool for you to talk about with your business stakeholders, your counterparts across the organisation. Is, hey, it's 100x, or it can be as much as 100x more if we get this wrong in production. So let's just start and make sure that we're building the right thing. Thank you. Over to you, Oscar.
Lee, Kim, thank you so much. I was watching this chat, and there has been an eruption of questions. I am not surprised at all. Everyone has been very active and engaged, obviously, with such a fantastic presentation and topic. So I'm going to jump straight in with some of the audience questions, if you don't mind. The first question: what are your top tips for successful co-design process?
Lee, you want to take this one?
Yeah, happy to. Oscar, should I just stop sharing my screen as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
Nice. So top tips for successful co-design. I think first of all, I'd say broaden your definition of what co-design means. So often I've encountered some people have a very textbook definition of co-design, that it has to be done with the customer. It's not true. You can co-design with other groups as a set of designers. In this case, I think it's a really good case study in that we did co-design with World Vision employees and World Vision staff members. And through the different types of experts that we invited into the process, we got a lot of insight from it. I think too, with any good co-design session, make sure that you are going in to co-design with a lot of preparation done. So we'd conducted all of our research activities before we went into co-design. And that meant we could introduce a co-design session with a key findings session first. So everybody's on the same page, everybody's looking at the same data and evidence points, and working towards solving the right problems.
Next question. Are there any business sectors where Agile is typically more successful?
In my experience, and I've worked across a few different sectors, this is my first time in a not-for-profit. No is the short answer. I think Agile takes many flavors and many forms, and that is largely dependent on the organization and less so the industry. It's a set of principles and methodologies that you will need to, regardless of industry and sector, adapt and modify to the people and the place that you're in at that time. And so I don't think it's necessarily industry specific. It's very much about kind of the people, the place that you're in at that point in time.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think just adding to what Kim shared, the origins of Agile are obviously from software development. So if you are working for an organization that's been born in the era of web and Web 2.0 specifically, sometimes they can be more agile because they don't have the legacy that older organizations have. So I completely agree with Kim. We work with banks, governments, large organizations across every sector. Their maturity in Agile is always different. However, I think some of those companies lucky enough to be born in this Agile era obviously don't have to overcome the legacy that some of these more traditional organizations do.
Thank you both. I think there's a secondary question that I think leads quite nicely. How can you use design thinking and Agile to solve regular issues facing employees or to solve issues within a team?
We'll need another masterclass to answer that one, I think, Oscar. No, look, it's a really good question.
To everyone.
It's not a small question, though. Look, I mean, Agile gives you a set of rituals and a shared way of working. And I think one of the key things that we observe with high-performing teams is that they're all aligned to those rituals and those ways of working. It doesn't need to be a carbon copy across every team, but as long as you're getting regular visibility of the work, that your team's in regular communication, that you're constantly reflecting on how well you're working together, some of those core things that come out of Agile, I think that can be really helpful to avoid problems occurring in teams, and maybe if you introduce them to help overcome problems that teams might be experiencing.
Here's an interesting one. Is designing for good any different for designing for good business?
Oh, sometimes yes. Dark UX exists for a reason. And I think it probably depends. We have as an organization and as an organization that exists within the not-for-profit and the charity sector have a very clear kind of mandate to do good. That's what we're here for. We are not for profit, so we're not generating dollars for ourselves. We're generating, the more money we make, the more money that goes to the field, to the work that we do in our programs. I mentioned before that I've worked across a number of different sectors. Some of those include kind of the sports betting and wagering space, as well as the airline and aviation industry and financial services. And while there's never an intention to sort of manipulate or sort of trick an audience, there is absolutely a different mindset in terms of how do we generate revenue and how do we kind of maintain a bottom line. And I think while that doesn't necessarily shift the design approach implicitly, it does impact the outcomes that you said about achieving.
Interesting. A burning question I can see here that's popping up more than once. Did you test the revised designs with users?
Yeah.
Do you mean the concepts that Lee produced or the final implemented versions that we launched?
I'll read it as both, to answer both, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Basically, by default, anytime we talk about testing something, it is with users. It's in our view never a good idea to use any other member that's not a user as a proxy for testing something. So yeah, definitely within the concept design phase, anytime that I talked about testing, it is testing with the general population and people that we recruit to certain specifications.
And from an implementation perspective, where we were looking to stray significantly from the concept design, which wasn't in a number of, there was a limited number of those examples. We did validate, we didn't do end-to-end testing again, but we did validate those specific kind of areas with supporters and user groups. And then we sort of set up a program of A/B testing once we were live as well, to make sure that if there was any remaining uncertainty or doubt, we could actually get some quantitative insights around what was happening in that space.
Thank you. Was customer journey mapping / personas part of the process?
No, look, it wasn't. It wasn't in this use case. We use something called user flow mapping. So it's probably a more pragmatic version of journey mapping, customer journey mapping. But for us, we had a very fixed context, which was the interaction of going through child sponsorship, digital acquisition journey. So in this case, it wasn't needed. I will say, though, there was a lot of inputs that we received from World Vision on previous research that they'd done on customer journey.
Had a mountain of research and that we dumped on him and the team, actually. Sorry.
Yeah, there's hundreds of pages, literally. Yeah, it was great.
I think this one here is for you, Kim. What tools are you using to identify and quantify the improvements, especially in terms of real-time engagement?
We have Google Analytics, so that's what we use for our analytics insights. We also have Full Story running on the site that we use for both quant and qual kind of insights, and then we do additional user testing on top of that when there's areas that we want to dig further into. They're kind of our primary ones.
Here's one. Do you use AI integration in the design?
Yes, is the short answer to that. So as part of, a number of design tools that we use, there are AI kind of add-ons, if you like, or additions that we use to optimize and simplify those processes.
I think we've probably got time for one last question. How has let me read this. How has the transition in respect to feedback from users and leadership, how have these new changes been received?
Well, I think the fortunate thing about having really great results is that it's very hard to dispute an outcome when it's as strong as that. So, Lee mentioned we've got, we're 30% now year on year. We're 5% conversion rate, so leading kind of industry averages in that space. And we're winning awards. So all in all, it's a hard argument to have.
Brilliant. I think that we'll have to close off, and my apologies for everyone on board who submitted a significant amount of questions. What we will do, I will send them to Lee and to Kim, and we will endeavour to pull them all together and send them out to you alongside a recording of this presentation today. I would also like to encourage anyone who is interested in learning more about this particular subject, gaining more skills in this particular area, to have a look at RMIT Online's website. We've got a UI and a UX design short course kicking off in March. Lee and the team at Symplicit have been heavily involved in creating that wonderful short course alongside other wonderful courses that we have across our portfolio. So please, if you're looking to reskill, upskill, or anything in between, please go check those out. And also, keep tuning in, because we will have another wonderful presentation similar to this, or with other industry partners coming up next month and the month after. So thank you, everyone. Big shout out to Kim again and to Lee for sharing their insights and knowledge. And for everyone listening, thank you for spending your lunchtime with us. Have a wonderful rest of the week.